the answer, it's the problem. And they're talking past each other. And I think it's more complicated than that. I think we need to remind ourselves of what and we're in serious times now as a country, and these debates are important. But we need to look and remind ourselves of what President Lincoln said at the height of the Civil War, when America was facing even greater challenges. And he said then, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. As our case is new, we must think anew and act anew. Our occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise to the occasion. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country." And I think Lincoln's words apply exactly today. We do need to think anew and act anew. We need to disenthrall ourselves. And a lot of the work that's happening in our sector, the nonprofit sector, the citizen sector, the civic sector, I think has a lot of the key to the answer. So what's some of the new approach that I try to articulate in this book? First, it is that we do have to have an economy that works for everybody. I felt this viscerally when I was campaigning. We have to reclaim America as the opportunity society that we were founded to be, that brought my father here and my Italian grandparents here, and make that American dream real for everybody. Secondly, whenever we have a problem or a challenge or an opportunity, our first question should be, what's the role of our citizens? How do we get people involved? Tapping their talents and expertise through service, involved in politics, and involved in movements. Third, it's innovators and entrepreneurs that drive change. And we have to have a robust system that encourages innovation and entrepreneurship both in the private sector and in the social sector, the nonprofit sector. Fourth, we need a different kind of role for government in the 21st century. I'm not an anti-government person. It's through government that we collectively express our will and debate the issues and decide what's important. But in the 21st century, I think government has to be more accountable, more transparent, more open. It should be focused on helping to scale things up that work and being willing to shut things down that don't. And finally, we need more public-private partnerships. We built City on a public-private partnership. We were all privately funded, thanks to people like Judith Kidd and Ira Jackson at then Bank of Boston, now Bank of America, that became the first company to sponsor a city or team. There was no AmeriCorps program when we started. And then once AmeriCorps happened, we became a public-private partnership. And it's only because of that partnership that City has been able to scale and achieve big things. And so we need that. But at the heart of this new approach is the nonprofit sector, where my experience is grounded. I think that we need to think of this sector. It has to reinvent itself. It has to become even more vigorous. It has to become more robust. You know, our sector, which de Tocqueville noticed, almost 200 years ago, remarked about America, our penchant for civic engagement, for associations, for volunteerism. It's even become more active and more important. And there's good news and bad news when it comes to our sector today. The good news is our sector is more robust and more important than ever. There are now 1.4 trillion not-for-profits in America, and 115 start every single day. It's more than doubled in the past 25 years. It's the fastest growing sector, faster than the private sector, faster than the government. The nonprofit sector collectively has $3 trillion in assets. Almost 10% of the workforce is in the nonprofit sector, 9.6 million people. So it's very, very robust, and it's growing, and it's more needed. That's the good news. The challenging news is, as you all know better than I do, the pressures on the nonprofit sector are increasing. With the economy the way it is, the demand is greater, and resources are falling at every level, federal, state, and local government, and even private philanthropy, which a year ago dropped. This past year came up just a little bit, but can't make up for the difference. And so we're sort of caught in this vice where our sector is needed more than ever. The poverty statistics came out last September. 14.3% of our citizens are living in poverty. And the amazing thing is that was like a one-day story in the front page of the New York Times. Then it sort of just wasn't talked about. Recently, they recrafted the index and said actually it's 15.6% if you sort of update the index to today's needs. So almost 1 in 6 of our fellow Americans are living in poverty. And they need our help. But at the same time, we have dwindling resources. And the challenge isn't just on the financial side. It's also on the people resource side. Bridgespan did a study in 2006 that said we're going to need, by 2016, 640,000 senior managers and 80,000 new leaders in the nonprofit sector. And then every year after that, it's going to be similar, another 80,000 people. So we've got to figure out how are we building the people capacity in our sector as well. And so I think part of what I try to discuss in this book and what I think we need to think about as a sector is we need to become even more vibrant. I don't think we can tinker at the margins. I think that our society rests on a three-legged stool. You have the private sector, the government sector, and the nonprofit sector, the social sector, or even better, as Bill Drayton, the founder of Ashoka, likes to discuss it, the citizen sector. And we need to, as a sector, take our place as just as strong a leg as those other two. But how do we do that? I think we need to build an ecosystem, a more dynamic ecosystem for the citizen sector, for the nonprofit sector, that will make it thrive and flourish in the 21st century so that it can be akin to the other sectors. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, you can look to the private sector for analogies. You know, when Vanessa and I spent a year traveling the world back at the end of 1995 through most of 1996. I have a chapter about it in the book. And our mission was to study civil society and find out where future leaders were, and we visited all kind of extraordinary people all over the world who were making change. And at the grassroots level, at the national level, we went to more than 21 countries, 5 continents. It was an extraordinary journey, and we met amazing people. It's really on that trip that Vanessa got the idea for New Profit. But the thing that struck us the most is as we were visiting, you know, villages in Vietnam where people lived on less than $1 a day and had no running water, no electricity, but they had Coca-Cola. You know, or we were traveling through China and we were trying to find the U.S. Embassy and nobody understood any word we said. We said United States, Embassy, America. Nobody can, this was back in 90, it wouldn't be that today, but this was back in 95. But as soon as we said the word McDonald's, everybody knew where to point us to go. We could take our then Bank of Boston, now Bank of America card and put it in a bank machine anywhere. And we were struck by, you know, global American brands from MTV to McDonald's to Coca-Cola to Michael Jordan and Bill Gates. And we were struck by how the private sector dominated the global economy. And we thought about it. Well, why is that so? Well, first of all, the private sector has incredibly fluid and well-functioning capital markets. From startups where you can get venture capital and angel investors and personal friends, to mezzanine and growth capital, to the ability to go public, so that at each stage of growth in your business, when you need capital, there's a whole system and different funders designed to help you. Secondly, there's resources you can tap. We have a whole set of institutions, you know, accounting firms, law firms, technology firms, marketing firms, et cetera. As a business, you can tap those best and, you know, most talented people to help you grow. Thirdly, we have a government that understands that its job isn't to be the economy, it's to help create a marketplace where the economy can flourish with reasonable regulation, but ultimately letting the market decide. Fourth, we have a culture that celebrates our private sector entrepreneurs. They become heroes, whether it's a Horatio Alger myth or the great entrepreneurs from 100 years ago like Carnegie and Rockefeller, who also became great philanthropists, or the entrepreneurs of today, the Google guys, Jeff Bezos, Stephen Jobs, Bill Gates, Oprah. We celebrate these entrepreneurs. We have a whole set of media institutions that both celebrate them and study the private sector, whether it's Forbes magazine or Fortune or Inc. or Fast Company or CNBC. There's a whole media setup. The business page in the paper every single day. You know, we've built this system, this ecosystem, so that if an innovation happens in the private sector, and it's powerful and it works, it gets support and it scales rapidly and it goes everywhere, literally all over the globe. So if you think about that, I think we need to build a similar ecosystem for the social sector. We need to think about, well, what is that equivalent? Well, first of all, we definitely need more dynamic and fluid capital markets. You know, that looks at each organization at its stage and says, well, what's the right level of funding and what's the appropriate amount of funding and what's the level of support? You know, and we have some of this developing. You know, there's the Echoing Green Foundation and Ashoka, for example, for social entrepreneurs who want to get started. But Echoing Green gets more than 1,000 applicants a year for just these small stipends to start an idea, and they have funding for 20. So where do those other 980 go? There's starting to be more of a development of my wife Vanessa with New Profit and others like the Acumen Fund and Robin Hood and now Edmund McConnell Clark. They're starting to do venture philanthropy and they're getting great results. But they're just a small piece of the puzzle. We need the equivalent of social investment banks. What happens as you're scaling? How do you really make that leap from startup to established organization to really the next stage? And how do you take these organizations